Hey everyone, this is D'Armond, the creator of ChartLogic. Welcome to ChartLogic 101. This is the first video in a training course on ChartLogic. In this video, I will go over the high-level features of ChartLogic and give a tour of the user interface and the usage of this unique EA. If you're ready to get logical, then let's get started. What is ChartLogic? Well, as a 30-second elevator pitch, ChartLogic is an EA for MT4 that lets you describe conditions on your chart based on a number of categories of information, and when all of the conditions are true, perform different types of actions. ChartLogic is chart automation for MT4 that lets you put your ideas into actions. Here's the content I have planned for the ChartLogic course. Over time, I may expand this to include further topics as I see what kinds of feedback I get from ChartLogic users, and in particular, if there are any areas that are especially confusing. ChartLogic started out as a simple idea. If these conditions are true, then do these actions. As I developed ChartLogic, I would have to add new features just to be logically consistent or complete. Or sometimes I would try to perform some action in ChartLogic, and I realized that there was just one more feature that would need to be added in order to get it to do what I wanted it to do. For a while there, I was afraid that it was going to get away from me and become too complex to finish or too complex for people to use without getting too frustrated by it. The whole idea is that it should make things easier, not harder. And for the most part, I think it has succeeded in that goal. There are the building blocks and the rules for how they go together. But at the same time, there is complexity here, which means there is a learning curve and it takes a little getting used to. Not a huge amount, but not zero. This training course will guide you up that learning curve. Let's hop over to MT4 and begin our tour of ChartLogic. So here we are in MT4. We're going to get started the same way that you do with any EA, which is dragging it onto your chart. Here's our configuration dialog. Now, often when I'm working with a new EA or if I'm experimenting with something, I would come to the Common tab, and I recommend turning off live trading to start with. Our ChartLogic inputs are actually fairly simple. We have the main input here, which is to provide a strategy file for backtesting, and we're not going to be doing any backtesting, so right now I'm not going to worry about that. The table settings here are a part of all Coral tools. This is what enables the skins to work across all Coral tools. So let's load a skin file. If you're familiar with any of the other Coral tools like Coral Max or Multimax or any of the other tools, they all use the exact same skin files. These files are all available on the free area of the website. You can download this set, and you can, if you've got a color scheme that you like, you can load this in. And the way that this works is the same for all Coral tools as well. These skin files, like the one that I just loaded, they do not change any settings other than the table settings, other than the base look and feel settings for all Coral tools. So the way that you would use it is you would set it up, you'd set up whatever tool you're running the way that you want it, get, either load a set file or, make any changes. And then when you're done, load the skin on top of it, and it will set all of the colors and styles, but it won't change any of your actual settings. The other settings for ChartLogic are the symbol settings. And we'll, when we talk about strategies in ChartLogic later, then we'll go into more detail on the symbols. For now, I'm not going to make any changes here. And then at the end of today's video, I'll go into detail about the logging settings. When ChartLogic starts, it runs something called a power on self-test. Power on self-test, or the post, will review all of the information that ChartLogic can see about its information, about its environment, and it will display that information in the log. So if you're having any trouble, if you're confused, if there's something that doesn't seem right, like if it's not trading, for instance, then when you start it up, you can look in the log and it will tell you, like for instance, right now I have trading. We turned off trading when we got to the Common tab, and then it's telling me with the power on self-test has detected that trading is not allowed. So we turned off live mode for this EA, and then the power on self-test told us that. So if there's anything that's confusing or if it doesn't look right, then you can check the power on self-test just to make sure as a quick sanity check that everything is working correctly. The user interface for ChartLogic is very similar to all of the other tools that are a part of the Coral family of tools. They all behave the same because they're all written using the same basically the same user interface library, the same base of code. So the little square in the upper left-hand corner is called the reticule. You can use this to drag the window around the screen and put it exactly where you want. The little X on the right-hand side is a minimize. So you can have it collapse everything down to the title bar, and you can still drag it around when it's collapsed. Sections have a little arrow that you can use to expand and collapse those sections. So this will often make it use up less room on the screen, make it easier to see what's going on behind you. And then there's a status bar here that will give you messages about things that are going on in the application as it's being run. So the first level of working with chart logic is this notion of strategies. And you see here I've got a section for strategies, and at the moment there's no strategies here. And if I want to add a strategy into chart logic, I can either create a new strategy. This is a very large button here that I can click, and that brings up the new strategy dialog. And I can also open existing strategies from disk. All of the files for ChartLogic are saved in your common folder to make it easier to save ChartLogic data, ChartLogic files, between different instances of MT4. MT4 is very limiting in terms of how it provides access to the files section on your computer. So you cannot, for instance, come here and move higher than this level where you start at. You can only go further down from here. So this is a folder in your common area called ChartLogic. And these are all of the folders that I've got created in my ChartLogic area. And I've created these myself. So I've created a folder for strategies, a folder for logic sets, a folder for conditions, and so on. And this is my own, I just choose to organize things this way. You can organize however you like. You can put them all at the same level. You can, put some folder structure, whatever you want. And then you would navigate, if you click a folder, it navigates down. And then if you click this little two dots, it navigates up, and then you can move around and so on. So now that I have a strategy loaded, so this is a strategy that will display ADR lines on our chart, and I can edit it by clicking the little pencil icon here in the list, and this will bring up the edit window for this strategy. Once I have made my changes, if I want to save those changes back, there's a little save icon that I can click, and then it brings me back to my file dialog. And this was a strategy called ADR levels. And if I had made changes and I wanted to save it, I could say save, and it will actually tell me, would you like to overwrite? Because there's already a file called ADR levels that exists in this folder. And so it will warn you so that you can not overwrite a file if you don't want to. And if I'm finished with this and I don't want it to be loaded in ChartLogic anymore, then I can close it by clicking the little close button. And it will just, it will ask me to confirm, do you want to remove this? And so it's not deleting it, it's just removing it from memory because I'm not going to be using it or whatever. When I edit a strategy, like let's say I were to come into ADR indicator and make some changes to something in here and then save those changes, then there's a little asterisk that is shown next to the name of the strategy in the list. And this asterisk is simply telling me that I have made changes. And it doesn't actually know anything about the changes. Like you saw, I didn't actually change anything, but I did open it to edit and then hit save. And that made it think that there were some changes in there. And so if I were to now say close this, it would warn me there are unsaved changes in this strategy. So if I were to close it now, I would lose those changes. So there's a visual reminder that something has changed, and then there's a reminder in the close dialog so that you don't lose those changes. I can view the content of this strategy by clicking the edit dialog, and now I've got these logic sets. And if I want to see what's in the logic sets, then I can navigate down, and here are the conditions in the logic set. So here's another set called a set condition that I can navigate down into and see all of the contents. And this is what I would use if I was going to edit something. If I'm developing, this is the authoring mode of working with a strategy. But it's a little bit inconvenient if I'm trying to get sort of a big picture understanding of what is in this strategy. So there's another way of viewing what's going on, and that is what's called the strategy viewer. If you click the name of the strategy in this list, it brings up the strategy viewer. At the moment, the strategy is not running, so there's no data coming through ChartLogic at the moment. This is simply the definition of the strategy. And so in this view, I can change how things are expanded, so I can choose what I'm going to focus on. So I have a section for every logic set, and then there's a row for every condition. There's a section for the actions. I can see what actions are defined. There's a type of condition called a set condition that is a grouping of other conditions. And there's different types of sets, so this is an AND set. And I can also expand those and see the details. And these are recursive, so a set condition can contain other set conditions, which can contain other set conditions, and so on and so on. So here, I can continue to navigate down and down and down through that list of embedded recursive set conditions, and each one will increase the number of dashes in front of it. So at some point you're going to get so many that you'll run out of room in that edit box. So here in this view, I'm seeing that it's a condition as opposed to an action. I'm seeing the type of condition, the type of action. Then I get the name. For the most part, throughout ChartLogic, these names are automatically created for you. You don't have to sit here and come up with unique names for every different condition or action and then actually take the time and effort to type them in. As you make changes to the dialogues, these names will automatically be updated for you. And then you see the variable name. So in some cases you can set a variable, like this is an indicator, which is, you don't see the indicator name anymore because you've defined a variable called ADR high, and then in the name, the automatically updated name will show you the name of the variable instead of the name of the indicator because you named it. Then you see over here on the right, it shows for conditions, if there's a name here, it'll show you what the name of that variable is. You don't have to you don't have to use variables. You can just use the indicator, in which case there's a value. And then when this is running, we'll see there's another column for the values. Often there's information that's useful if you hover over it. This is more about a running. We'll look at this when we're running a strategy in a little bit. But I do want to point out, why does this variable here have an asterisk next to the name? And that is because there's two different kinds of variables. There are local variables and global variables. This variable here, this ADR high 100 variable, has been designated as a global variable, and so it's been identified with an asterisk. All of the other variables in this list are all local, which means they only exist within this one logic set. If I click on the name of any of these conditions or actions, then it will open up the configuration dialog for that line. So this line is an indicator, and I can see here it is the ADR indicator, and then here are all of the settings. This view, when I have clicked this row here, is a read-only view. I cannot interact with this dialog in any way other than closing it. Closed, and I could also close it by clicking it on its name on this list again. And you notice when I clicked this row, it became highlighted. So this reminds me of where I am in the strategy when I was looking at this information. So if I click on another row, it opens up the dialog, and I can just sit here and click down this list, and it will in turn open up a separate dialog for the row that I'm, and it will only have one open at a time. So it doesn't pollute your screen with a bunch of dialogues as you're clicking around. But this will let you very easily get down further into the details for this row, for this information in your strategy. Like I could say, oh, this variable that I named here, ADR high 100, says it was a global variable. And I can come over here to the dialog, and sure enough, there it says global. And if I click this next one down the list, it says local, and so on. So I can, I can see all of the information about any of the rows that I want to. So this view, this strategy viewer, is a really handy way of navigating around and getting a big picture view of what is in your strategy, and even clicking down and getting into the details. So let's turn on this strategy. So in the So I can click the strategy name again. That's the show and hide button for the strategy viewer. There is a little red circle to the left of the strategy name in the strategy list. And what that red circle is telling me is that this strategy is not running. There's nothing happening right now with this. But if I want to turn this strategy on and have it run, then I can click the little red circle. So that's the way that you activate a strategy. And now the strategy is running. And there's a little number next to the strategy name now, and that's telling me how many threads are running. And for this strategy right now, there's only one thread, which means it's only running for one symbol because that's how we configured it. And if it's running, you can't edit it, because if you were to change something in somewhere in the strategy, there'd be no way for that change to go live, to be integrated into a running strategy. So if you're gonna change it, if you're gonna edit it, then you have to stop it from running first, and then you can go and change it. And if it's running, it will warn you, this strategy is active. If you want to edit it, it's going to be deactivated. Would you like to proceed? And you say yes, and then it opens a dialog, and then you can edit it, but it's no longer running. So let's run it. And now, if I were to click this name, it's going to bring up that strategy viewer again, except this time, this is in live mode. So this is, it's also what I call the thread viewer instead of just the strategy viewer. And so what we're seeing now is when a condition has been evaluated as true, but it's going to be shown in green text. And if there is a variable, I'm going to see what the value is. So I see the variable name and the value. And if there's no variable, then I see the value and it tells me that it passed. And if I hover over that text, then it will give me, usually it will give me information about what happened when it passed or failed its evaluation. So this is time 0, which gave me a time now. And then if I wanted to expand these actions, then I can see the actions that are in this logic set. The result in the, so what's going on with these actions is there are a lot of parameters that are used to configure what's going on with an action. Like if we were to take a look at this object, this is all of the data that's configured, and I can't display all of this information at once on each row, but I can show some of it. So one row of data of these parameters is displayed at a time in the thread viewer. But this might not be the most useful piece of information for me to see. It's just coming up because it was the first item in the list. So this little asterisk in the column to the left, I can click that and it will cycle through the parameters that are configured for that row. So there it's showing price 1, and I can see here that price 1 is taking the variable called ADR high 100, and then I can also see the value that is the last value that was passed to this object. So this lets me see here in real time for the running strategy all of the data that is being passed and how it's being used by any row, any of the running conditions or actions that are in my strategy. And the same thing for the different types. So this is a text type, and it's showing me the anchor because it was the first thing in the list, and I can cycle through all of the parameters and all of the values. This is a strategy that's running on one chart, which means there's one thread, and we saw that because there's only a number 1 right here. This list here is showing me all of the threads that are in this active strategy. And I have this top one, which is the strategy itself, which is not a thread. This is the strategy. And then below that, I would have all of the instances, all of the threads that are running 1 per symbol. And at the moment, we're only running on 1 symbol, so there's only one named, one thread in the list here. If I were to switch over to this row, this ADR indicator, then it's the one without data. It's the strategy itself that's not running. And then if I want to go to the thread, then I can click the thread and it comes back to the thread view. By default, if you open up the strategy viewer on a chart where there's a strategy running, then where it has an active thread for that chart, then it will pre-select that thread in the viewer. So you don't have to open it and then come here to the list and select your, it will always come up, but you can then change it to view whichever one you want. So I do want to show something about this dialog. So throughout this dialog are buttons, and the current skin that I am using to show the user interface does not make a distinction between text fields and buttons. So it's a little bit hard to tell by looking at this where there's a button and where there isn't a button. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on, I'm going to adjust how buttons are displayed, and then we're going to come back to this dialog and I'll show you what's going on. So we have here a way of saying the normal cell background color is configured with this RGB value, and then the normal button background color has been configured with the exact same color, and because of that there's no distinction and it's kind of hard to see. So just for the purpose of showing you what I'm talking about, I'm going to choose a slightly different color. Let's choose dark khaki for our button color, and now things that are buttons have a different look to them, and for me it's not as pretty to look at. I don't quite like the way that looks as much, so I prefer the view where they're the same color. But for the purpose of demonstration, it makes it harder for somebody who doesn't know these dialogues as well as I do to know where the buttons are. So now that I can see where the buttons are, you can see, well, this cycle lets you choose the chart time frame, and so if I click that, then this is a drop-down button that shows all of the different time frames, and this lets me choose between ticks, bars, and seconds for the expiration. The range size is a button that's currently turned off. I can click that button to turn it on, and for this, the time here is what data do I want from this candle. So sometimes you click something and it's a drop-down list with a bunch of options, and sometimes you click it and it's a toggle, like this on and off button. And the reason is that when there's only a choice between two things, like range size is either on or off, the variable name is either local or global, these things only have two options, and so there's no real need for a drop-down list to choose between two options. Anytime there is a drop-down list where there is more than one option, then when you click it, it will open up a drop-down list that you can choose from. So that's why it's simply, if it's only two things, then it just toggles. It doesn't waste your time showing up, bringing up a dialogue. You can just click to toggle back and forth between the two things. And if there's more, if there's like a list, then it will bring down the whole list. Now, there are one or two places in the application where I broke that rule. And in particular, this happened with, I'll just show you. Let's go there and I'll show you where I was inconsistent. And that is with a set condition. Let's add a set condition. And in the set condition, next to the set name, it tells you what kind of set condition it is. It's an and. And if you click it, it toggles over to or. And originally, when I first started writing the set condition, those were my only two choices. It was just and or. That was it. But then I realized, you know what? I need another option, which is not. And so I just extended it so that it would add not. And then recently I'm like, you know what? I need a fourth one, which is for. I need this to be a loop. I need to be able to support looping. And so now there's four choices for this set condition type, but it's still just a button that toggles between those four choices. So hopefully that's not too bad. And then with this iterator in the for loop, there's three different types of iterators. There's each, and until, and while, that just controls like when does the loop stop iterating, when its conditions are true or false. And there's a whole another course planned where I'm going to talk about iterators. But just to explain like why sometimes the behavior, so for the most part, when you see a drop-down list, you're going to get your, it's either going to, give you a full list that you can choose things from, or it's going to, toggle between your options. In these lists, this is the edit logic set dialog, and I've got two conditions in this dialog, and I've got the button here that I can click to edit them, and then I have this menu button next to it with three dots. And this is very similar for all conditions and actions, where I have these three different actions that are, menu items that are available to me. I can clone it, I can save it, or I could delete it. So I'm working in a strategy called ADR indicator, and this strategy has a logic set called ADR high. And in that logic set, I've got conditions, like I've got this ADR high condition, I've got this time now condition, and this ADR high, this might be something that I would want to use in other strategies. And so I could actually come here and say save this, and then I can save. And now this is, I'm saving a condition. I'm not saving the whole strategy or the logic set. And so I have a separate folder here that I've created where I can come and save, if I've defined a condition such that I want to be able to reuse it again later, I can save it. And or if I'm getting ready to start making changes and I'm not sure that I'm going to keep the changes that I'm making, I could save it, and then I could make changes knowing that I could delete my changes and go back to the previous version anytime I wanted to. Another thing that I can do is I can clone a row. So let's take a quick look at what's in here. There's kind of a lot of stuff in this. So I get the current day time. So this is the time of the start of the current day. And for the purpose of this indicator, this is where this line would start going to the left. So it goes to the beginning of the day. And then I've got the ADR high levels for each of those different percentage ranges. And if I wanted to, let's say I was just writing this for the first time, and then I wanted to create a version of this that was for, ADR low, then what I could do is I could clone this condition by opening this menu and hitting clone, and then it creates a copy and adds it to the end of my list. So ADR high copy. And now if I were to edit this, I can start coming in here and making changes. So I can change the name, I can edit. I can change all these from ADR highs to ADR lows or whatever I wanted to do. Let's see. Oh, this was the time. So this was ADR high. I could change that to ADR low price, or I could change the level from 100 to 112 or whatever I wanted. So I could just make changes, and then I could save. And then let's say I realized, that was dumb. I didn't want to do that. That I could come here and I can delete this. Yes, delete. When conditions are being evaluated as a part of a logic set or as part of a set condition, the order of things matters. And in this particular case, this actually won't matter because all of these guys, all of them are just setting variables. So they're always going to evaluate true, basically, because all of them are setting variables. But if they're not conditions like that, if they're conditions that are testing something, then it matters if they are true or false. And normally, unless you're in a not or an or set or something like that, then if a condition is evaluated as false, it stops. Then the conditions below it will not be evaluated. And so the order of things matters. So the first column here is the order that things are occurring in. And you can adjust this order by clicking the number. And so what happens is that this will move this up one item in the row. So we're moving up this number 225. Like, let's say I wanted 225 to be the first thing in the list that is evaluated. So I can click it all the way up to the top, and then now it's the first thing in the list. And I can bring it back down by clicking the things below it to move them up. So it's fairly simple, fairly straightforward, but it just gives you control over, because before I would have to, let's say I wanted 225 to be the first thing in the list, I'd have to delete everything and then add it back in afterwards, and it was, pain in the neck. And so now you can simply, cause things to move up and down by clicking them in that sequence column. Another thing that I will often do is I'll start adding conditions into a logic set or into another set condition, and I will realize, what, I want these things to be either lower down or higher up in the strategy. I don't necessarily like where I've put them. So let's say I've decided that, I don't want all of these ADRs here at the same level as this D1 time. Maybe I want them in their own set for some reason. So at this point, what I could do is I can add a set condition, and I can call it something else like lower set. All right, so now I've got a set condition, and I could take any condition that's here, and I can move it down into that lower set. If you click on this menu, now this lower set that I just created is a menu option that I can move things into. So I can just go down this list, and for each row, I can click it and say move. I made a mistake. I moved that one up and I meant to move it down. So let's fix that. So we're going to save this ADR high. So in addition to moving down, you can also move it up, but you can't move it any higher than the logic set. Logic set is the top. So from the logic set, there's no move up, but I can move it down. So I could move it down into ADR high, and then we can go back into ADR high, and there it is, and I can move it down. All right, so now let's open this up again. And so now in this ADR high, I've got this lower set that I can edit, and there's all of my conditions, and they're out of order because I screwed up, so I can fix the order. And now all is right with the world again. Something else that you might have noticed when I was just doing that is, so let's take a look at that. So I've got a condition, I've got a bunch of, I've got the set condition and I've got a bunch of conditions in it. And let's say I realized I wanted to make a change to each of these. Like, maybe this is a case where these are all ADR highs and I want them all to be ADR lows. So when I click a row, when I click to edit a row, that whole row becomes selected. And so that I can come over here and I could say this is low and then save. And then I can come back over here. And the purpose of this is it visually makes it easier for me to keep track of where I am when I'm going through and editing a bunch of conditions in a condition set or in a logic set. So as I edit, just visually, it reminds me where I am. And then I've made a bunch of changes that I don't actually want to save. So I'm going to cancel and cancel and cancel. And now all those changes are discarded. Let's go to a condition where I'm doing some kind of a test. Let's put a new condition here so I can demonstrate this. Let's put a candle condition. And then I want to test this close, compare it to some other value. And I can either type in a value or I can choose a value from the list. And this is a model that you see over and over again throughout chart logic, where I've got an edit field where I can type in a value directly right next to a pick list where you can choose a value from the list. This list is showing you all of the variables that have been defined in the environment that are within scope of where I am. The input is always the data that's returned from the previous thing. And so if I were to choose the input in this case, then it would be coming from the last condition of the previous set. So if you have a bunch of conditions in a row, each condition passes its data to the next condition. So any condition can say, give me whatever the last guy did, and then I'm going to look at that data. That's always the input variable. And then whatever variables you have defined, you can choose those as well. Now, if you choose one of these, the value goes away and it only shows you the selected variable. So it will always, it's pretty visually clear what's going on. Like in this case, if it were showing both and you had both a value and a variable, then it would be a little bit confusing. Like, which one is it actually using? So when you do choose a variable, then the value is hidden just to make it absolutely clear that it's only going to be looking at the variable, not the value. And if I then come here and select none, then the value field comes back. So we do that everywhere, all throughout chart logic. Another little handy thing that you see in this dialog, I've got this configured for whatever the chart time frame is. In this case, it's an H1 chart, and it expires after 1 bar. And then right to the right of where it says bar, it says 60 minutes. And so this field here, this little box, is showing me how the configuration settings for the cycle and the expiration translate into a passage of time. So if I were to change this to an M5 chart, on an M5 chart, 1 bar is 5 minutes. If I were to say 6 bars, then on an M5 chart, 6 bars is 30 minutes. And if I were to change it to 12 bars, then on an M5 chart, 12 bars is 60 minutes. So it's just a handy way of verifying what what these settings are translating to in terms of actual time. And if I choose something that doesn't have time, like ticks, then it goes away. And seconds is useful too, because here I could say, well, 300 seconds, that's 5 minutes, and 3,600 seconds. That is 60 minutes. So just as a way of, verifying that, something means what you think it means. So in the ADR pullback, I have a lot of stuff going on here. So I can, in the strategy viewer, this column header where it says EXP can be used as a shortcut to expand and collapse everything in the list. So, I don't need to see everything all at once. If I did, I could expand everything, and I've got everything expanded. But if I wanted to just see it at a high level and then I can choose where to navigate down, then that's just a handy little shortcut there, that button in that column header. So let's close this and edit it. Okay, so now I'm in the logic set dialog. I'm in the strategy dialog, and I've got my list of logic sets. The first column here, it has the column header says E, and it's showing me they all have a Y next to them. And I know that some of these logic sets are doing trading things, and some of them are just displaying information. So if I wanted to disable trading, then I could turn off the logic sets that are doing trading by clicking the header of the row. So I happen to know that these two logic sets here, the high pullback and the low pullback, are trading. And so if I were to turn these off and activate this, let's do that. So ADR pullback, ADR high pullback, ADR low pullback have been turned off. So if I were to activate this strategy, okay, we've activated it and it's active now with one thread. And if I open this and take a look at it, those two logic sets are not listed here. They did not get added to the running thread because we did not enable them. We disabled them, and so they don't get included. So you can very easily control which logic sets are added to any active thread by enabling and disabling them. Let's say that I wanted to quickly enable everything, then I could click this E header, and anything in this list that is disabled will be enabled. I also have the option of coming into a logic set and looking at the actions, and I can disable any individual actions. So this action here, which was sell, is also disabled. So I can turn on individual actions, turn on and off individual actions. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of what things are going to be executed or not executed at any given time. And then let's take a look. Let's save this. Let's keep that disabled for a moment, and I want to show you one other thing. And that is in this, so we saw that this action was disabled. So in the strategy viewer, anything that's disabled will have it, it'll tell you that it's disabled. So you could quickly, you don't have to navigate down through the dialogues to find out what's enabled and what's disabled. You can see it in this high level view as well. And the same thing if you were to come to this and turn off that logic set, then here you see that this logic set is turned off. So it just gives you a little visual indicator that you can then, oh, I want to turn everything on, then you can go and turn it on. Okay, the last thing I want to cover in this video is I'd like to look at how logging works. So as we've been doing things, you may have been noticing that there are messages that are being displayed in the status bar. So if I were to turn that on, it tells me I've activated the ADR pullback strategy. And if I were to turn that off, it says deactivate the pullback strategy. Well, as things are happening in strategies, it's also writing information to the log, and the level of information is controlled by your input setting, this logging level. So logging gives you a lot of control over how much information is going to be written to the log. So if you're confused about what's happening with the EA, if it's not behaving right, if you want to verify the data, if you want to, troubleshoot something, then it might be useful to have a lot of information written to the log. So you can hit debug, which will start to write debugging information to the log. Tracing will give you just a huge amount of data to the log. All of the when objects are initialized and deinitialized, they will often write that information as a trace message to the log. Debugging is when values are calculated or decisions are made, it will often write information about that to the log. Profiling is about performance. Things that take longer to run will write information to the log, as well as when you shut down the EA, and not shut down a strategy in ChartLogic, but when you shut down the ChartLogic EA, it will also write profiling data to the log that you can verify. You can take a look and see, how things are performing. Fail, I don't actually think fail is used by ChartLogic. This was something that was added for Multimax, as a matter of fact. When an EA is considering a trade, but one of its built-in conditions is telling it not to trade, it would create a fail message. I'm not actually using that in ChartLogic. Info messages, these are more generic, so this is not like debugging info, but it's, I just started a strategy. I just deactivated a strategy. I opened this file, that kind of thing. Then warnings are things didn't go quite right and it was surprising, but it wasn't fatal. It wasn't serious. So a typical example of this is, you might have configured it to take a trade, but it tried to trade and it couldn't. And maybe it didn't take a trade because the slippage was too high, or the actual open price that it calculated was too close to, whatever. Just something was not right. And so it'll give you a warning message to the log, but it doesn't have to stop the execution of the program. An error is a much more serious thing. So something didn't go right and it's bad news. The program didn't die, but it certainly is not working correctly, and that's something that you might want to take a look at. Fatal is something terrible has happened, and we have to stop. we cannot continue. We were smart enough to see that something bad happened, but not smart enough to fix it and keep going, so it had to shut down. And then you can also say none. Set it to none, and it won't write any of its own messages. It will only write, so when an EA trades, then it will always write a message to the log, but that will not come from ChartLogic itself. That's coming from MT4. So if you don't want any messages, in general, it's best to have it set to info. And, once you're kind of accustomed to how things are working, you might want to, step that up to warning. And so now you're only going to get messages when things are not working right. When EAs and indicators and so on are writing information to your log, these log files are saved. And over time, they can accumulate. And if you're putting, let's say you were to put this to trace, and you're going to get a huge amount of logging information written to those logs. And it's not going to take long before those log files are taking up a lot of space on your disk. So you probably would want to go and delete them. And so the more information you're writing to the log, the more often you should go and delete your log files. If you're giving a lot of information for a reason, then you would want to go in and review them more frequently. So info is a pretty safe level. It's not going to, write a huge amount of information, and then you're going to have to do a little bit less maintenance. But over time, you still should be aware of, just go take a look at, how much disk space. If you have a problem with disk space, this is almost certainly why. Okay, that is the end of ChartLogic 101 and the high-level introduction to and review of the EA. Thank you for watching. ChartLogic is available in the MQL5 market. If you liked this video, please give it a like to let me know that this is the kind of content you're interested in. And if you're so inclined, you can subscribe and click the notification icon to be notified when I post new videos. Leave a comment below to let me know if I made any mistakes or if there are any features you would like to see in future versions.